The Edmonton Oilers dropped one in a shootout Saturday night. Darnell Nurse is struggling, and the Oilers only have 13 games until the Olympic break.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my 10th season doing digital hockey content, my third as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The wild card round is going crazy, and FanDuel is in playoff mode. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day, including today for Texans Steelers. So on today's show, we will open talking about the loss Saturday night to the Kings, why it was a funky game, the vibe, the overall energy of the game. Then in our second segment, we will talk about the Oilers' Darnell Nurse problem, why the Jake Walman injury, which looks like it's coming to a resolution relatively shortly, has really been a foil in the Oilers' plans, at least when it came to how they constructed their roster in the preseason. And then we will evaluate the Oilers' schedule, their upcoming 13 games over the course of the next 4.5-5 weeks that will lead them up to the Winter Olympic break. So to start out, anytime you lose a game in the shootout, you feel unsatisfied. Even when you win in the shootout, you're happy that you won, but you don't feel particularly accomplished. It's funny that the Oilers lost in the shootout on Saturday night, because I'm presently reading a book written by the late Ken Dryden about the life and death of Steve Montador, an NHL defenseman early in the 2000s and into the early 2010s. He was a fringe guy, a fifth and sixth defenseman, was on the Flames team that went to the Stanley Cup final and lost to Tampa Bay in 2004. But one of the undercurrents of the book, it's not just about Steve Montador's life. It's also about the NHL at large, how hockey has changed over the years, the driving forces of those changes. And one of the chapters I read on Sunday afternoon was about the post-lockout order, that post-2004-5 period, where one of the takeaways was the introduction of the shootout and some of the impetuses for implementation of the shootout as the NHL standard procedure as trying to Americanize the game to some degree. One of the undercurrents of the book is Ken Dryden emphasizing that Gary Bettman is an American and that culturally his perception of hockey is always going to be a little bit different. It's why he's insulated and surrounded himself with former players that have that Canadian identity that he can lean on, and he can mooch some of their credibility. And the implementation of the shootout is largely to get the game closer to what we see in the other American sports, where baseball games don't end in ties, basketball games cannot end in ties, and football games end in ties, but very rarely. And they have streamlined the rules to really make sure that someone wins the game without the game ending in a tie. And the shootout's unsatisfying, because that was a funky game in the sense that a lot of the goals come off of what we would call broken or set plays. And when people are scoring off of transition or off of face-off plays, that tells you that there's a lack of attention to detail. You think about the Corey Perry goal that the Kings score relatively early on in that game, because Connor Ingram loses sight of a rebound. And look, I can only complain about the goaltending so much without myself getting bored. We know Connor Ingram and Calvin Pickard are not NHL caliber goalies. We are well into this season, and that cannot stand for much longer. Tristan Jarry was a participant in practice on Saturday. We are getting closer to the eventual return of Tristan Jarry. Chris Knobloch last week had said probably one more week. So if you want to pencil him in for some time in the middle of next week, the week of the 18th, I think that's a reasonable summation. But this was a very volume-centric game. And the reason I say that, high danger chances, only 7-4 in favor of the Kings for the whole game. 7-4 in favor of the Kings for high danger chances for an entire 60-minute contest. And especially within the context of the fact the Kings have 57 scoring chances. Only 24 of those scoring chances end up as shots on goal. And I'm going to do the math real quickly. 43% of the Kings' scoring attempts actually resulted in shots on goal. And then of those scoring chances for only 7 to be registered, of those shots on goal, only 7 to be registered as high danger. 7 divided by 57, we're talking about like a 12% of the Kings' offense being classified as dangerous in this game. And look, the Oilers are in a very weird spot lineup-wise. We have been talking ad nauseum over the last 2 or 3 weeks about how this lineup is going to shake out. Now that you've got Hyman, Nugent, McDavid going well, that you've gotten McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman going relatively well, how do you mitigate when you have these funky games? How do you solve these problems where players are playing relatively well, but you still have big theme problems? And we're going to talk about the Darnell Nurse situation in our second segment, but when one of your most used players is losing their minutes and convincingly, it's hard to overcome that. And the Oilers are playing a lot of guys, whether you're talking about Stastny, Regula, Emberson, Stillman, whatever defenseman you're thinking of when I say the depth guys, they're being asked to do a lot more than probably A, they had anticipated, and B, what they've done historically in their respective careers. And that's not to say you shouldn't give opportunities. I would be very, very hypocritical if I said I didn't want the Oilers giving these guys chances, especially because the Oilers' lack of other options. And B, if you have these guys, you got to try and find out. You got to get more information. And look, that trade deadline is looming on the horizon. You're hearing Boone Jenner. You're hearing Charlie Coyle. You've heard a variety of names. You may have heard the Canucks tried to hawk Evander Kane back to the Oilers. But the Oilers need as much information as they can get about the guys they presently have in-house. I would like to see them keep that third line of Roslovic, Howard, and Savoie constituted with each other. Now, they didn't have a great game against the Kings on Saturday. 41% of the scoring chances, 43% of the shots on goal, 0 goal share, and then 35% of the high danger chances. Not a very good game from that group, but the Kings play a heavy, plodding, forecheck heavy style that's going to be challenging for wingers like Howard and Roslovic, who are not the most detail-oriented guys. I do think third-line center is a real point of emphasis that the Oilers need to upgrade. I don't want it to come at the expense of Matthew Savoie, who I think is an NHL caliber player, looks relatively okay, but he just doesn't have that next gear yet. He doesn't have the hockey sense, the hockey IQ to really take advantage of the opportunities around him because he's just getting up to NHL speed. This is his first real prolonged period of time at this level, and there are going to be growing pains. There are going to be bumps and bruises mentally and maybe developmentally, and that's okay. I have been very critical at times of the Oilers' unwillingness to let guys sink or swim to some degree. And there are downsides to that. If you look at the Luke Hughes situation in New Jersey, that's an example of a young player being thrown into a sink or swim situation. He is sinking because he's being asked to do too much. The team at large around him is struggling as well, and it's really contributing to a cultural malaise where nobody feels like they're making progress. The team feels like it's stuck. And now everybody's kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. When it comes to the Oilers, giving guys like Regula, Emberson, Savoie, Howard, Hudson, giving guys like that a little bit of burn, Clattenburg earlier in the year, giving guys like that just a cup of coffee, just some run, just to see. If they stink, no harm, no foul. You send them back to the AHL, they get more ice time, they learn, and we run it back in a few months. That's the nature of this sport, especially when we are talking about really depth roles. When you're only getting 11 to 12 minutes per game, it's really hard for you to be noticeable. It's really challenging for you to make an impact. And then real quick, just on the game at large, great to get Leon honored. Anytime you have a milestone like that, it is important you celebrate it. We'll talk a little bit about that at the start of the second segment for our moment is zen, but reasonably played game with slightly better goaltending, you probably win that game, but there's probably at least 10 losses. You could say that for the Oilers this year. Connor Ingram was not atrocious, but he probably should have had at least one of the goals that the Kings scored. A lot of set plays, a lot of rush opportunities, which tells you the defense wasn't necessarily as detailed, as tight as it probably needed to be in front of someone of Ingram's caliber. Like we talk about, my everydayers know. I'm not asking Connor Ingram to win them the game. I am just begging and pleading with him. Do not lose us the game. And he wasn't awful. The Kings had 2.03 expected goals at even strength. They had 2 even strength goals. That's fine. I can live with that. But all of this is to say, It's a regulation game against a team you are probably going to be in competition with for a playoff spot. First time you play them this year, you keep tabs. The Kings are not as good as they were last year, though I do still think they have a little bit more to give, more likely than not, based on the capacity of some of those young players. I really liked what I saw from Brand Clark. Their capacity to maybe get a little bit better as the season goes along, take a little bit more personal responsibility. You think about Quentin Byfield as well. As young guys who we are waiting to see them explode, they have physical talent, but it just hasn't come all the way together for them yet, whereas the Oilers are very much carried by their big guns. And the Oilers are all sitting around, fingers crossed, hoping and praying that one of their young guys, whether it's Savoie or Howard, can really take advantage of the opportunity being laid before them to improve, to really help the team. And then maybe when we're talking about the trade deadline a month from now, we don't need to go out and get a top six winger, and we need only a bottom six winger and maybe a seventh defenseman, because those are a lot easier to come by. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, speaking of defensemen, we will dive into the Oilers' very real Darnell Nurse problem and if there are any solutions right after this. New year, big goals, and somehow even less time to cook. If you're trying to eat better but don't want to spend hours grocery shopping or meal prepping, Factor makes it easy. These are fully prepared meals designed by dietitians and crafted by chefs so you can eat well without all the work. Factor meals are made with quality, functional ingredients that lean into proteins, colorful veggies, whole foods, and healthy fats. No refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners, and no seed oils. Just real food that fits your goals, whether that's eating healthier, managing calories, or getting more protein in the mix. Factor Meals has a ton of variety. There are over 100 rotating meals every week, including high protein, calorie smart, Mediterranean, and even GLP-1 support options. The meals are always fresh, never frozen, and they're ready in just 2 minutes. No meal prep, no stress. Factor also has new Muscle Pro meals. They're perfect when you want something higher in protein to support strength and recovery. It makes sticking to your goals so much easier because the food is already done for you. Head to factormeals.com/locked on NHL 50 off and use code Locked On NHL 50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's factormeals.com/locked on NHL 50 off code Locked On NHL 50 off. Make eating healthier easy with Factor. Thank you so much to everybody that is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. And real quick, for our moment of zen, celebrating Leon, one of the most gifted players I have ever had the great privilege of watching. He's going to end up in the conversation for, if we're going to be sticklers, he could, if we're not counting Russia as part of Europe, because culturally Russia is probably closer to Asia than it is Europe, but culturally, if we're going to include Russia with Europe, he's probably going to end up being the fourth or fifth best European player of all time. If we're excluding Russia, maybe behind Lidstrom, he has an argument as the best European player of all time when all is said and done. And look, I have loved what Leon has done, and it's important you celebrate those moments. The Oilers are good about that type of thing. History is important. You build traditions. You establish your history. It gives your fan base something to touch on. It is really one of the things that separates you from other franchises is that you celebrate your guys. You take good care of them. But the Oilers are reaching a critical mass in the Darnell Nurse situation. We are 3 years into Darnell Nurse no longer being the Oilers' most important defenseman. As Mattias Ekholm was brought in and Evan Bouchard has emerged as one of the 10 best defensemen, not Canadian, Evan Bouchard over the last 3 years has been one of the 10 best defensemen in the NHL. I can make an argument for as high as 5th or 6th overall, especially if we're going to add weight to his postseason performances where, if you didn't know, he has the second highest points per game rate of any defenseman in the history of the NHL in the postseason. The only defenseman in the history of the NHL with a better points per game ratio in the history of the sport is Bobby Orr, who was pretty good at hockey in his day. So, as Darnell Nurse has lost those offensive opportunities to play with McDavid at 5-on-5, to quarterback the first power play, his value to the team has decreased immensely. It is one of the real environmental factors that really determines how valuable a defenseman can ultimately be. It's why in today's NHL, it doesn't make sense to have more than one defenseman who is getting paid a premium rate. With only so many power play minutes to go around, with only so many 5-on-5 minutes with your best forwards to go around, if you have 2 or 3 defensemen all at $8 or $9 million per year, it's going to be really challenging for those guys to provide the value requisite to their contracts because there are only so many minutes. And in the case of Darnell Nurse, who is no longer the power play one quarterback and does not play a lot with McDavid at 5-on-5, his value is largely derived from the defense he's able to provide. And number one, defense is always going to be less valuable than offense because we exist in a positive sport. You have to score more than your opponents. So even if you play perfect defense, the game would never end. And that's really the issue here. Nurse does not really tilt the ice meaningfully. He does not move the puck up the ice well. And the Oilers are really getting killed in his 5-on-5 minutes this year. He's playing the third most average time on ice of any defenseman on the team behind Bouchard and Ekholm. He's getting 19-11 at even strength, 20 seconds of power play time. So when the second power play does go out there, and then he's a minute 15-ish on penalty kill. He's spending 32% of his competition against the other team's best players. Bouchard is up at 36. So this isn't like he is being asked to play Travis Sanheim level or Adam Fox level matchup minutes where we're talking 42% of his ice time against the other team's best players. Instead, he's getting a slightly lower dose of that. And yes, it's a lot more than the third pair because the third pair is heavily sheltered because the Oilers do not have a ton of trust in those guys. And I understand between Emberson and Stillman and Regula, you don't have a lot of experience between those guys and you're trying to protect them best you can. In Darnell Nurse's minutes this year, the Oilers have been outscored 40-30. As a team this year at even strength, the Oilers have been outscored 91-106. So when you subtract Darnell Nurse's goals for and against from the Oilers, they are at 61 goals for, 66 goals against. That's a 48% goal share. That's still not good. You're still under 50%. But with Nurse on the ice, the Oilers only have a 46% goal share. That's not good enough for somebody who is supposed to be the Oilers' second best defenseman. Now, the one addendum, the one carve-out we will give Darnell Nurse here is the goal this year was to have him and Walman on the offside being the second pair, and largely trying to mitigate his deficiencies through Walman's skating and his puck moving. Walman is a good puck mover and a strong skater for a defenseman. Walman has only played 17 games this year. He's never played more than 70 games in a regular season at any point in his NHL career. He's only played 38% of the Oilers' games this year. This year, in Darnell Nurse's ice time, with Alec Regula, they have been outscored 17-6. With Jake Walman, they have been outscored 11-10. With Spencer Stotzney, they have been outscored 4-3. With Evan Bouchard, that's the one situation where the Oilers have outscored their opponents 8-4. But ideally, and I got to click on over here, in the minutes that Nurse has with Walman, they've been outscored 11-10. Now, that's not good, but for a matchup pair that's playing with your less talented forwards, especially when you consider the fact that earlier in the year, when the Oilers were struggling, they weren't getting as much production from when they put Draisaitl and McDavid together and they were losing those minutes. And then when those guys were together, the Nurse and Walman pair was not getting the benefit of McDavid and Draisaitl minutes at all. So that made their job of trying to facilitate offense, get to offense, all the more challenging. And look, when it comes to Darnell Nurse, as you've heard me say with the goalies a ton this year, I do empathize with the fact that he is being asked to do stuff he can't do. He is not the player they thought he was when Ken Holland gave him that extension during the 56-game season. That was the single most unreplicable environment, maybe in NHL history, that 56-game season where the Oilers played in that all-Canadian division. None of the teams had particularly good defenses. Only really the Canucks had good goaltending. And that was it. That was a bandbox environment where there were a lot of high-scoring games, not a lot of defense. Nurse was the power play one quarterback. He was playing with McDavid. And he had, as an ideal a contract year as humanly possible, because those counting stats as a defenseman are what get you paid. You look at what a Jacob Slavin makes, you look at what a Gus Forslings makes, even a Vladislav Gavrikov, who signed a 7-year, $7 million per year contract with the Rangers this past July. He's only getting $7 million a year, even though consensus, he's one of the 5 or 6 best defensive defensemen in the world coming into free agency. And he could have probably gotten more, but he chose to take that 7x7 deal. I like what Walman is supposed to be, but that injury concern is very real. And the Oilers have a real tipping point going on here with Darnell Nurse, because he's got to go down to the third pair, but they don't have a second pair guy capable of playing to that degree. And it's really becoming a serious issue the longer we go along. And look, I like what Spencer stats, and he brings a lot. I think Ty Emberson needs more rope, because I think he can be a decent third pair guy, but they're still a top 4 D-man short. Even if Walman's healthy and Walman's playing well, he can only carry Nurse so much, and you need your top 2 pairs to be net positives, not one positive barely in Bouchard and Ekholm, who aren't having the easiest go of it this year. I do think it's fair to say Ekholm is regressing, and it's age-related, and the miles have accumulated. But the Oilers need more from their back end. And speaking of needing more, we are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we will dive into the 13 regular season games that separate the Oilers from the Olympic break right after this. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our businesses and think, there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Quo makes everything simple. Your whole team can text and call from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversational thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer, and you can even keep your existing number. And Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps, so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnhl. That's QUO.com/lockedonnhl. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. Thank you so much to everybody that is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers, as we have the Olympic break looming on the horizon, like the shark from Jaws, the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. It is brooding off in the distance. You can hear those big rumbling footsteps, or you can hear the dun 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 coming on the horizon. The Olympics are going to be the best. I know there are concerns about the rink, the neutral zone that looks like it's about 8 feet wide that McDavid will get through in 2 strides. I get it. When we get there, it is going to be a great showcase of our game. There will be at least 1 or 2 more episodes of Locked On Oilers between now and then, breaking down some Olympic stuff. But the Oilers have 13 games between now and February 4th, the last game before the Olympic break. That game is against the Calgary Flames. Opportunity is knocking here for the Oilers. Of these 13 regular season games between now and the Olympics, 9 of them are against teams that are not presently in playoff spots. Those include tonight, Monday night, against Chicago, then Nashville, Vancouver, St. Louis, the Devils, Pittsburgh, Anaheim, Toronto, Calgary. Of those games, Vancouver is dead. St. Louis is dead. New Jersey, who lost to the Jets, is dead. You have Pittsburgh, who is back and forth. Malkin came back last week and looked good, but they are in a weird spot. Anaheim, who has struggled the last month or so after getting off to a straight start. Toronto is playing better as of late. They've looked a lot better the last week or two. That might be a team in a playoff spot by the time they face the Oilers. And then the Flames, who are no longer in the cellar, but are not really making a serious push. And then playoff opponents, the Islanders, the Capitals, the Sharks, and the Wild. The Oilers have lost both of their games previously to the Wild. They lost to the Islanders. Washington and San Jose represent opportunities. And you can only play who's in front of you. And I have been pretty harsh on the Oilers. I'm not going to lie. I have said pretty continuously now for a few weeks, they're really only beating bad teams. And whenever they have come up against the Minnesotas, the Dallases, the Colorados, they really missed their chances, and they got smoked by Colorado in the one game when Colorado was still really humming at the peak of their powers early on, when it didn't seem like they were going to lose a game at all. And when you have this condensed of a schedule, where we're talking 13 games in 3.5 weeks, you really have a lot of these 3 or 4 game weeks. And most weeks you're going to play 3, but because the Olympic break is 2.5, 3 weeks long, you are going to have a lot of 4 game weeks, which means you need to get your goalie situation squared away. If Tristan Jarry is going to come back and Ingram has to go back to the AHL because of his emergency recall stipulation, that means Calvin Pickard's going to start 1 game a week for the next month. Do you feel great about that? I certainly don't. Can you figure out a defensive alignment that works? And by virtue of Adam Henrique going on LTIR, the Oilers are going to be able to figure out bringing back Walman and bringing back Tristan Jarry without needing to do more cap shenanigans. But make no mistake about it, we're going to learn a lot about the Oilers over the next 3 weeks because the schedule is soft. With 9 of the 13 games against non-playoff opponents, the Oilers, who are 5-10-3 against playoff teams this year and are 17-6-4 against non-playoff teams, you need to take advantage. 17-6-4 against non-playoff teams is a real opportunity. That tells me you beat the teams you're supposed to. Now, the postseason, of course, features good teams. You got to beat good teams if you want to make a conference final, make a Stanley Cup final. The Oilers have demonstrated a baseline competency for beating up on bad teams. Now, can you find ways to beat Minnesota once? Can you beat the Islanders or San Jose, who looks like they might be shaking off the cobwebs as far as being good? And then you throw in the mix, you got Islanders and Washington, who are taking advantage of a weak Eastern Conference. And these games, these are your dog days. And the Oilers, a majority of this team, is not going to the Olympics. You got Leon going, you got McDavid going, you got a few prospects who are representing smaller countries going. But for the most part, for your injured guys, for your Tristan Jarrys, for your Jake Walmans, this is about getting healthy. This is about getting ramped up. For Zach Hyman, it's an opportunity to mentally reset. You've played really good hockey since getting into the lineup in December. Reset. This is a team that desperately needs its veterans like Zach Hyman at the top of their game. For someone like Vasily Podkolzin, for someone like Kasperi Kapanen, for someone like Savoie or Ike Howard, or for Matthias Ekholm, take as much time as you can to ramp yourself up mentally and physically for that stretch run, because it seems like it's a long way away. We will be first week of April like that. And this run from the middle of January through the trade deadline usually feels like a slog. It's the dog days of winter. The days are very short. The games are numerous, and it starts to feel like everything is blending together. And this is where we usually start to see roster and standing separation. The East is very congested. The West is very congested. The Oilers, with this soft schedule, and don't get me wrong, post-Olympics, they got a lot of divisional games. They got to play San Jose. They got to play Anaheim. They got a lot of divisional games they got to take care of down the backstretch, which will have the added weight of being 4-point games, especially with so many teams, Anaheim, San Jose, in the mix. The Kings are in the mix. Vegas is in the mix. With so many teams hanging around all of those 4-point games, you might see something funky happen in the standings where maybe Seattle gets back in the mix, maybe Calgary gets back in the mix, maybe Nashville gets back in the mix. It's not impossible. You piece together 1 or 2 good weeks, you are right back in the thick of it. Look at the months the Leafs have, look at the last 2-3 weeks the Leafs have had. They're still not in a playoff spot, but they're a hell of a lot closer than they were, say, 2 weeks ago when we were talking maybe that we would see Craig Berube get fired as something to shake things up, to inspire that group to playing better hockey. But all of this is to say, with this many games against non-playoff teams lined up for an Oilers team that is feasted on them, this is your opportunity. Even if you go 8-5 over those 13 games, sold. I don't even care who you beat. You go 8-5 over those 13 games, you get your 2-3 week Olympic break. Everybody who's not going to the Olympics gets a nice 2-3 week reprieve. Ramp up, lock in, let's go. When Connor and Leon come back, they are probably going to be a little tired. If Connor and Canada go all the way to the gold medal game, there's some overtime in there, there's some high intensity, emotionally draining games. That's going to take a toll. And look, he is playing some of the best hockey of his life right now. That point streak is superb. The way he is playing is outright dominant. But you need him at his best, and the Olympics will take something out of him. So everybody else who is on an actual break, not at the Olympics, is going to need to pull the rope in the same direction. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every single day. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. If you are not yet an everydayer, check the show notes for more information to join the Everydayer Club, where you can get access to the exclusive Discord server and ad-free episodes of the show. If you are watching over on YouTube, we send you to the first ever national 24/7 Locked On YouTube channel. If you are listening on audio, go check out Locked On NHL Game Night on the Locked On NHL feed. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. I will do an episode that's going to go out during the day on Tuesday and one later in the day about the game Monday night, because I can't watch it live. So I need to watch the game after the fact, take notes, edit, and then do a show. So you will get 2 episodes on Tuesday. I will talk to you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.